The media narrative is a calculated distraction. It fixates on the kinetic, missile salvos, naval formations. Analysts point to Iranian threats against American bases or the impact on global oil prices. This is a fundamental misreading of the strategic calculus. A state facing internal solvency collapse, like Iran with its ongoing protests, does not initiate a symmetric conflict. It is mathematically guaranteed to lose. The primary vector is not explosive. It is silent. The true target is the central nervous system of a global finance and military command. Data flow. CSS reports detail the catastrophic fragility of undersea communications cables. A coordinated severing of key nodes, an act with negligible kinetic cost, induces a systemic liquidity crisis faster than any human can react. It is an attack on market architecture itself. The second vector is orbital, satellite blinding, a non-kinetic attack that renders the entire sensor grid of a superior adversary inert. This act creates the blind Leviathan, a hyper-advanced military power whose entire doctrine is built on AI-driven warfare and data supremacy, is instantly rendered deaf and sightless. It is a creature of immense power, suddenly trapped in a black box. This is the systemic liability. The Leviathan's own advanced weapons become the accelerant. The new hypersonic motors on U.S. Navy assets and AI-enhanced targeting protocols are designed for a data-rich environment. Without it, launch-on-warning protocols become a catastrophic flaw. A blinded system, facing a perceived decapitation strike, is mathematically forced to escalate. The protocol's objective was never to win. It was to force the Leviathan to trigger its own unstoppable, hyper-fast response into the dark. The initial vector is not kinetic, it is economic. A state's solvency is not measured in currency, but in its monopoly on political control. When this control erodes internally, as documented with protests challenging Iran's regime, source number 4, the state faces a systemic liability. This is a solvency crisis. Analysis from CSS regarding Russia's conflict highlights a core principle. A prolonged, unpopular conventional war accelerates the very solvency crisis it was meant to solve, becoming a terminal domestic liability. A conventionally weak state cannot afford this pathway. It is mathematically forced to pivot to asymmetry. The target must therefore be a global economic vector, where a minimal kinetic cost produces a maximal systemic shock. Attacking a choke point to manipulate global oil prices is a blueprint for this strategy. Source number 2. The act externalizes the aggressor's domestic crisis, transforming it into a global liquidity event. This is not a gamble. The aggressor's calculus relies on the adversary's own advanced arsenal. The response is predictable. A hyper-fast strike enabled by AI-driven targeting, source number 1, and delivered by new hypersonic platforms, source number 3. For the weak state, this technological superiority is not a deterrent. It is the desired trigger mechanism. The motive, therefore, is survival via systemic blackmail. Faced with guaranteed internal collapse, the regime initiates its own launch-on-warning protocol. Weakness is weaponized to force an automated, technologically accelerated escalation, converting a domestic solvency problem into a global, zero-sum crisis. The entire protocol hinges on a mathematical imbalance in the economics of lethality. The Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, frames this as a kinetic cost problem, a $5 million main battle tank versus a $500 first-person view drone. This is not warfare. This is arbitrage. The cost to project lethal force has collapsed, a phenomenon analysts label the democratization of violence. A state facing an internal solvency crisis no longer requires a peer-level military to attack a global economic vector. It leverages cheap, disposable assets to trigger an expensive, non-recallable response from a superior adversary. While the U.S. Navy commissions next-generation hypersonic motors, the asymmetric actor forces its hand with consumer electronics turning the advanced weapon's speed and finality into a systemic liability. There is no de-escalation from a Mach 5 impact. The asymmetric escalation protocol is not deployed in a vacuum. It requires a specific environment, a gray zone. These are not random pockets of chaos but designated proxy laboratories. RUSI analysis confirms that states under extreme internal solvency pressure become ideal staging grounds. The objective is to test an adversary's kinetic cost thresholds and response times outside the primary theater of economic warfare. Regional instability is merely the symptom that indicates the laboratory is active. The current designated gray zone is the operational theater surrounding Iran. The regime faces a terminal solvency crisis, evidenced by continuous internal protests challenging its authority. This internal pressure creates a mathematical forcing function. The state's leadership has already broadcast the trigger for the protocol. It will attack American bases if it perceives an existential threat. This is not a threat, it is a pre-declared strategic sequence, a public filing of intent. This staging ground possesses the critical feature: direct access to a global economic vector. A kinetic event initiated by Iran against oil transit in the region would have a mathematically predictable catastrophic effect on global prices. This is the asymmetric leverage. The weaker state does not need to win a conventional engagement. It only needs to initiate an attack on this vector. The market panic is the primary weapon, engineered to trigger an automated, disproportionate response. Ultimately, the gray zone is chosen to exploit the adversary's liability, its own speed. The U.S. development of AI-driven warfare and hypersonic motors, confirmed by contract awards, removes the possibility of de-escalation. A launch-on-warning posture becomes a systemic necessity. The proxy laboratory, therefore, is not the battlefield itself. It is the launch point for a protocol designed to force a superior power to defeat itself through its own efficiency. The instability is a feature, not a bug. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not a policy of aggression. It is a mathematical function of time and distance. With the operational deployment of hypersonic motors, the flight time of an incoming kinetic strike is reduced to single-digit minutes. As RUSI analysts confirm, decision cycles that once accommodated human deliberation have been rendered obsolete. The response protocol must be automated. This speed is a systemic liability. The entire defense architecture is predicated on infallible sensor data. This is the entry point for the fog of digital war. A strategic cyber attack is not designed to destroy infrastructure, but to induce informational paralysis. By blinding early warning radar and severing satellite uplinks, a hostile actor creates ambiguity where mathematical certainty is required. For the commander, the choice is an illusion. The protocol dictates the response. Is the sensor blackout a system malfunction, or is it masking a decapitation strike that will land before diagnostics can complete? The kinetic cost of waiting for confirmation is total strategic failure. Therefore, the protocol forces a launch based on the warning itself. A sudden, inexplicable blindness is the warning. The superior adversary's own reliance on AI-driven speed becomes the very vector of its own entrapment. The asymmetric escalation protocol is not theoretical. It is a mathematical sequence. A state facing an internal solvency crisis, evidenced by persistent domestic protests, is forced into a kinetic cost-benefit analysis. A direct strike is untenable. The logical first move is a calibration shot. According to analysts at CSIS, the protocol requires a deniable, non-kinetic event designed to test the adversary's response latency. The target must be a global economic vector. A conventional war directly impacts global oil prices. Therefore, the vector is energy logistics. The AI systems now reshaping war are designed for speed, not ambiguity, making them a systemic liability. The new hypersonic motors necessitate a launch-on-warning posture. The test is to see if the machine can be baited. Within 12 months, expect a coordinated, attribution-impossible cyber attack on the industrial control systems of a major Gulf oil terminal. The event will appear as a catastrophic logistics failure, a glitch that halts a significant percentage of global supply for 48 to 72 hours. Its true purpose: to measure the precise time between the digital signal and the activation of the adversary's automated kinetic response protocol.